The mountain man bought the Black Widow with a sack on her head for $2. Then she called his name. The auction house reeked of desperation and unwashed bodies. Smoke from oil lamps hung thick in the air, casting dancing shadows across faces that had seen too much wilderness and not enough mercy. Abner Calloway pressed his back against the rough wooden wall, watching men bid on things no decent person should sell. His fingers worried the last 2 silver coins in his pocket. The bandits had taken everything else 3 days ago. His gold dust, his winter supplies, even his spare boots. They had left him alive out of cruel amusement, stranded in dusty gulch with nothing but the clothes on his back and the axe at his belt. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man with gold teeth, called for attention. 2 burly men dragged forward a woman with a burlap sack tied over her head. Her hands were bound behind her back, but her spine remained straight, defiant. "Gentlemen, behold the Black Widow herself." The auctioneer's voice carried theatrical menace. 3 men dead in as many months, each one found cold in his bed the morning after taking her company. They say she carries a curse that follows her like smoke. The crowd murmured. Several men stepped backward. Abner studied the woman's posture. Something about the way she held herself sparked a memory he could not name. Dignity wrapped in rough canvas, grace under the weight of accusation. Course, she might just be unlucky, the auctioneer continued with a gap-toothed grin. Maybe the 4th man will break the curse. Who knows? Bidding starts at $5. Silence stretched through the room like a held breath. $4 then. Come now, she's sturdy enough. Look at those shoulders. More silence. The oil lamps flickered. $3, too. $1 for the Black Widow. Abner's hand moved before his mind could stop it. The coins clinked together as he raised them. $2, he called out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone behind him whistled low and mocking. "Well now, the mountain man's feeling brave," the auctioneer said. $2 for the cursed woman. Any other takers?" The room stayed quiet except for the whispered jokes at Abner's expense. Sold to the fool with the death wish. The gavel came down with finality. 20 minutes later, Abner led the woman into the alley behind the auction house. Her hands were still bound, the sack still covering her face. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "I'm going to untie this," he said quietly. "Then you can go wherever you need to go." She said nothing. Abner worked at the rope around the sack. His calloused fingers fumbled with the knots. When the burlap finally fell away, he found himself looking at a woman who stole his breath. She was African, maybe 30 years old, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to his bones. Her hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that belonged in drawing rooms rather than auction houses. There was something familiar about the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her head. "Hello, Abel," she said softly. The name hit him like a physical blow. His knees nearly buckled. No one had called him that in 20 years. No one in these territories even knew that name existed. "My name's Grizzly," he managed through a throat gone dry as dust. She shook her head slowly. "Some names can't be buried, no matter how deep you dig." Abner stepped backward until his shoulders hit the alley wall. His hands shook as he stared at this woman who had just torn open a past he had sealed shut with 20 years of silence and distance. "I don't know you," he whispered. "You knew me once." Her voice carried the weight of old sorrow. "Before the fire at Willowbrook, before you ran away and became someone else." The words Willowbrook and fire together made something crack inside his chest. Images flashed behind his eyes. Flames reaching toward a star-filled sky, the screams of horses, the smell of burning timber and dreams. "Who are you?" The question came out strangled. "Someone who's been looking for Abel Calloway for a very long time." She held up her bound wrists. "Someone who needs his help." Abner stared at the rope around her wrists, then at her face, then at the mouth of the alley where the street lay waiting. He could cut her bonds and walk away. Return to his mountain cabin and his solitary life. Pretend this night never happened. But she knew about Willowbrook. She knew about the fire that had taken everything from him. She knew about the sister he had failed to save. What do you know about Sarah? The name felt strange on his tongue after so many years of silence. The woman's expression shifted. Something that might have been pity flickered across her features. If you walk away now, she said quietly, you'll never learn the truth. You'll never know if your sister really died in that fire, or if she's still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to find her. The words hung in the night air between them like a challenge and a promise and a threat all wrapped together. Abner looked at this mysterious woman who had just shattered his carefully constructed world with a handful of words. His survival instincts screamed at him to run. But his heart, that traitorous organ he had tried so hard to silence, whispered something else entirely. It whispered hope. Abner cut the ropes from her wrists with his hunting knife. The woman rubbed circulation back into her hands without complaint. No tears, no dramatics, just quiet endurance that spoke of familiarity with hardship. I can't take you anywhere, he said finally. I've got nothing left. No supplies, no money, barely enough food to get myself back to the mountain. She nodded as if she had expected this. Then I'll find my own way. The words should have been his cue to leave, walk away, return to the safety of isolation. But something in her voice held him rooted to the dusty ground. Where will you go? Does it matter? She straightened her torn dress with careful dignity. Towns like this don't welcome women with my reputation, especially women who look like me. Abner glanced back toward the main street. Even at this late hour, he could hear voices from the saloons. Rough laughter, the kind of men who would see a lone woman as entertainment rather than a person needing help. His conscience warred with his survival instincts. 20 years in the wilderness had taught him that charity was a luxury he could not afford. But 20 years had not erased the lessons his mother taught him about treating people with decency. The cabin's 3 days north, he heard himself saying. You can rest there, figure out your next move. She studied his face in the dim moonlight. Why would you help someone you claim not to remember? Maybe I don't remember you, but I remember what it means to have nowhere to go. They walked to the edge of town in silence. Abner's horse, Thunder, stood hitched outside the general store. The animal nickered softly at his approach, the only creature in Dusty Gulch that seemed genuinely pleased to see him. One horse, the woman observed. You can ride, I'll walk. She shook her head. We'll take turns. The first miles passed without conversation. The woman sat Thunder with the easy grace of someone accustomed to long rides. Her posture remained alert, scanning the darkness ahead and behind them with the wariness of hunted prey. When they stopped to rest near a creek, Abner built a small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, and for a moment he thought he glimpsed something achingly familiar in her features. Then she turned away and the recognition slipped through his fingers. You really don't remember me, she said quietly. I remember the fire. I remember running. Everything before that feels like it happened to someone else. She poked at the embers with a stick. Sparks rose into the star-filled sky. Memory is strange. Sometimes it protects us by forgetting. Sometimes it tortures us by remembering too much. Which one are you? Both. They switched positions after midnight. Abner walked beside Thunder's steady hoofbeats, his boots wearing familiar grooves in the earth. The woman rode in silence, but he could feel her watching him, studying him, measuring him against some internal standard he could not fathom. Dawn found them in rolling country dotted with sage and juniper. The woman slid down from Thunder and walked alongside him without being asked. Her city dress was impractical for wilderness travel, but she made no complaint about the rough ground or the growing heat. Tell me about Sarah, she said suddenly. The name stopped him mid-step. What about her? What do you remember? Abner resumed walking, but slower now, reluctant. She was 8 when the fire happened, bright as polished silver. Used to follow me everywhere, asking questions about everything she saw. His voice grew rough. She had this laugh that sounded like water running over stones. You loved her. She was my whole world after our parents died. I was supposed to protect her, but you couldn't. The words hit him like a physical blow, All the guilt he had buried under 20 years of hard living came roaring back, his hands clenched into fists. The fire spread too fast. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see. I searched every room I could reach, but the ceiling was already coming down. I had to choose between dying with her or living with the failure. The woman stopped walking. When he turned to face her, tears tracked silently down her cheeks. What if I told you that choice might not have been necessary? What if Sarah didn't die in that fire? The words hit him like lightning striking dry timber. Everything inside him went still and electric and dangerous. Don't. His voice came out as a growl. Don't you dare give me hope about something that's been dead for 20 years. Hope is all I have to offer. Then offer me proof instead. She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small object. A locket, tarnished silver with tiny scratches across its surface. She held it out to him with trembling fingers. Abner stared at the locket without touching it. He knew that piece of jewelry, had seen it every day for the first 12 years of his life. That belonged to my mother. Sarah was wearing it the night of the fire. His hand moved without permission, accepting the weight of the locket. The metal felt warm from her body heat. Inside, he knew, would be a miniature portrait of his parents on their wedding day. Where did you get this? From someone who knew your sister after Willowbrook burned. Knew her how? Where? The woman's expression grew guarded. That's a longer story, one that involves dangerous people who don't want the truth known. What truth? That the fire at Willowbrook wasn't an accident. That certain children from wealthy families didn't die that night. They were taken. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Abner's feet. The locket grew heavy as a stone in his palm. Taken where? Places where young people disappear and are never heard from again, unless someone cares enough to look for them. Thunder stamped his feet and snorted, ears pricked toward the trail behind them. The woman noticed immediately. "We're being followed," she said quietly. Abner turned to scan their back trail. In the distance, dust clouds marked the passage of multiple riders. How many? 4, maybe 5. Her voice carried no fear, only cold calculation. They've been tracking us since we left town. Who are they? She looked at him with eyes that held depths of knowledge he was only beginning to fathom. The same people who don't want you to find Sarah. The riders came at dawn with guns drawn and murder in their eyes. Abner woke to the sound of Thunder's nervous whickering. The woman was already sitting up, her hand moving to something concealed in her dress. Her movements carried the fluid precision of someone who had awakened to danger many times before. 5 of them, she whispered, surrounding the camp. Abner reached for his axe. The familiar weight of the handle grounded him. 20 years of wilderness living had taught him that survival often came down to who struck first and struck hardest. "Stay behind me," he growled. She gave him a look that might have been pity. The first rider emerged from the morning shadows with his pistol already cocked. A lean man with dead eyes and a badge pinned crooked on his vest. 3 more followed, spreading out to cut off escape routes. "Well now," the badged man called out. "Looks like we found ourselves a runaway and her buyer." "We're not looking for trouble," Abner said carefully. "Trouble's already found you, mountain man." The rider spat into the dust. "That woman you bought belongs to some very important people. They want her back. She's free to go wherever she pleases." "See, that's where you're wrong." The woman rose to her feet with languid grace. Her torn dress and bound hair gave her the appearance of defeated prey, but something in her posture made Abner's instincts scream warnings. "Let me handle this," she said quietly. Before Abner could respond, she stepped forward. Her movement triggered instant alertness in the mounted men. Guns swung toward her. What happened next defied everything Abner thought he knew about the mysterious woman from the auction house. She moved with the deadly efficiency of striking lightning. Her hand emerged from her dress holding a knife that caught the morning sun. In one fluid motion, she threw the blade and dove sideways. The knife took the leader in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. His horse reared and bolted. The woman rolled behind a boulder as the other riders opened fire. But she was no longer where their bullets sought her. Abner watched in stunned amazement as the woman he had thought helpless dismantled 4 armed men with clinical precision. She used the rocky terrain as cover, appearing and disappearing between boulders. Her movements spoke of extensive training in combat and survival. When the shooting stopped, 3 riders lay unconscious in the dirt. The 4th had fled, chasing his panicked horse toward the horizon. The leader sat propped against a rock, clutching his wounded shoulder and staring at the woman with newfound respect. "You're supposed to be dead," he gasped. "Disappointing, isn't it?" She retrieved her knife and cleaned the blade on his vest. "Tell your employers that Euphemia Hawthorne is very much alive, and very much interested in continuing our previous conversation." The name hit Abner like a physical blow. Euphemia Hawthorne. He knew that name from wanted posters and whispered stories. The bounty hunter who had vanished 6 months ago after taking down the Silverton gang. The wounded man's face went pale. "You're the Black Widow," among other things. She turned to Abner, and he saw her clearly for the first time. Not the helpless auction victim he had imagined, but a dangerous woman who had allowed herself to be captured for reasons he could not fathom. "We need to talk," she said. They left the wounded men with their horses and water. Professional courtesy, Euphemia called it. The kind of mercy that ensured stories would be told and reputations maintained. As they rode north toward Abner's cabin, she explained the truth that reframed everything he thought he understood. "I'm a bounty hunter, was a bounty hunter. 6 months ago, I uncovered evidence of corruption that reached into the territorial government. Someone very powerful wanted that evidence buried along with me. So you let them capture you. I let them think they captured me. The auction house was supposed to be my execution, sold to men who would ensure I disappeared permanently." She glanced at him with something that might have been gratitude. "Your $2 accidentally saved my life." Abner struggled to reconcile this revelation with the woman he thought he was helping. "What does any of this have to do with Sarah?" Euphemia's expression grew grave. "The corruption I uncovered involves human trafficking. Young people taken from wealthy families and sold into situations they never escape. The operation has been running for decades. Since the Willowbrook fire, the fire was cover. Several children disappeared that night. Official records show them dead, but I found evidence suggesting otherwise." Abner's hands tightened on Thunder's reins. "You found Sarah." "I found traces of her, bills of sale, transport records, references to a girl matching her description." Euphemia's voice grew careful. "But Abel, you need to understand. 20 years is a long time. People change. Especially people who survive things they were never meant to survive. She's alive. That's all that matters." "Is it?" The question hung between them as they rode through country that grew more familiar with each mile. Abner's cabin lay another day ahead, but already he could smell the pine forests of home. "Tell me where she is," he said. "First, tell me why you really left Willowbrook. The truth this time." Abner was quiet for so long that Thunder's hoofbeats became the only sound in the world. When he finally spoke, his voice carried 20 years of buried shame. "I didn't just fail to save her. I chose not to go back into the house when I heard her screaming. The fire was too hot, the smoke too thick. I chose my life over hers. You were 12 years old enough to know right from wrong." Euphemia reined her horse to a stop. When Abner turned to face her, tears tracked down her cheeks again. "What if I told you that your choice that night was the only reason you're alive to search for her now? What if going back into that fire would have meant 2 deaths instead of 1 disappearance? I'd say you're trying to make me feel better about being a coward. I'd say you're wrong about what really happened that night." She reached into her dress and withdrew a folded paper. Old, yellowed, handled many times. "Sarah wasn't trapped in the fire, Abel. She was taken before the flames reached her room, taken by people who knew exactly which children to grab and which ones to leave behind." Abner stared at the document without touching it. "How do you know?" "Because I know who took her, and I know where she is now." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain and the promise of storms. "Where?" Euphemia's expression grew harder than winter stone. "She's with the Crimson Ridge gang. And finding her is going to require us to walk straight into the heart of everything I've been running from. Euphemia's hidden cache lay buried beneath 3 feet of stone and earth in a canyon that time had forgotten. They reached the site as storm clouds gathered overhead, turning the sky the color of old bruises. The canyon walls rose like cathedral spires on either side, carved by centuries of wind and water into something that felt both sacred and dangerous. "Help me move these rocks," Euphemia said, dismounting near what appeared to be a natural rockfall. Abner studied the arrangement of stones with growing admiration. The concealment was masterful. Anyone passing would see only the debris of geological time, not the deliberate architecture of a woman who understood the value of secrets. They worked in silence, moving stones that had been carefully selected for weight and placement. Thunder grazed nearby, his ears constantly swiveling toward the canyon mouth where danger might approach. Beneath the rocks lay old canvas wrapped around wooden boxes. Euphemia handled each container with reverence, as if touching something holy. When she opened the first box, Abner understood why. Maps covered every surface, hand-drawn charts showing routes between territories, marked locations where children had disappeared, names and dates written in Euphemia's careful script, documenting horrors that official records claimed never happened. 12 years of work, she said quietly. Every missing child I could trace, every corrupt official who looked the other way, every piece of evidence that proves this network exists. Abner lifted a ledger from the second box. The pages contained financial records written in multiple hands, payments made, services rendered, human lives reduced to accounting entries. One page made his blood freeze. "The Willowbrook children," he read aloud. "Sarah Calloway, age 8, Benjamin Fletcher, age 10, Mary Catherine Walsh, age 7. His finger traced the entries below Sarah's name: transport costs, boarding fees, training expenses. The bureaucracy of stolen childhood laid out in neat columns. "She was moved 7 times in the first 3 years, Euphemia said, reading over his shoulder. "Each sale to a different owner. Each owner training her for a different purpose." "What kind of training?" Euphemia's silence answered more clearly than words. Abner turned pages with hands that shook. The entries for Sarah continued for years, but gradually changed in character. Less about her being moved and more about her being consulted, decisions made, operations planned. "She learned to survive," Euphemia said, "and then she learned to control." Control what? The people who had controlled her. The final entries in Sarah's section painted a picture that defied Abner's understanding. References to the Crimson Ridge Gang, strategic decisions, territory disputes resolved through negotiation rather than violence. "She's not a victim anymore," he said slowly. "No, she's not." Thunder's nervous whinny cut through their conversation. Both turned toward the canyon mouth where dust clouds announced approaching riders. "How many?" Abner asked, already reaching for his axe. "Too many." Euphemia began stuffing the most crucial documents into a leather satchel. Territorial marshals by the look of them, plus hired guns. The men from this morning must have brought reinforcements. They worked frantically to conceal the remaining evidence. Rocks went back into careful arrangement. Canvas was buried beneath sand and debris. Within minutes, the cache appeared undisturbed, but the riders were too close. "There's another way out," Euphemia said, leading Thunder toward what appeared to be solid canyon wall. Behind a curtain of hanging vines, a narrow passage wound deeper into the rock. The space barely accommodated horse and riders, but it led to freedom. They emerged 3 miles away in pine forest that smelled of approaching rain. Behind them, shouts echoed from the canyon as their pursuers discovered an empty hiding place. "They'll keep looking," Abner said. "Let them. The real evidence is here." Euphemia patted the satchel secured to her saddle. "Everything we need to find Sarah and expose the network." They rode hard through country that grew wilder with each mile. The storm that had been threatening finally broke overhead, sending sheets of rain across the mountainous terrain. Lightning illuminated the path ahead in brief, stark moments. As they took shelter in a cave system Abner knew from his trapping days, Euphemia spread the rescued documents on dry stone. By firelight she showed him the full scope of what they faced. The Crimson Ridge Gang controls 3 territories. They've moved beyond simple robbery into something more complex: protection services, information brokering, territory disputes resolved through fear rather than violence. Led by Sarah, the records suggest she's become their primary strategist. Some entries refer to her as the Ghost Walker, someone who moves between worlds without being seen. Abner studied a map marking known gang movements. How do we approach her? Carefully. The woman you remember died in that fire 20 years ago. The person who survived has become something else entirely. Something dangerous. Euphemia's expression grew haunted. Something necessary. In her world, gentleness equals death. Mercy means weakness. She survived by becoming harder than the people who tried to break her. But she's still Sarah. Is she? After 20 years of violence and betrayal, after learning that survival requires choosing between your conscience and your life, would you still be able? The question hung between them while rain drummed against stone overhead. Abner thought about the boy who had fled Willowbrook and the man who had emerged from 20 years of wilderness isolation. The distance between those two people felt vast as the territories they would have to cross. There's something else, Euphemia said quietly, something the records don't clearly explain but the implications suggest. What? My connection to all this, why I know so much about the trafficking network, why I've spent 12 years documenting crimes that most people don't want to acknowledge. She withdrew one final document from the satchel, a birth certificate, yellowed with age. The mother's name was listed as Sarah Calloway. Abner stared at the paper until the words blurred. You're her daughter, born during her 5th year in captivity, given away when I was 3 months old to people who couldn't have children of their own. She's your mother. She's the woman who bore me. Whether she's my mother depends on what we find when we finally meet her. Outside the cave, thunder rolled across the mountains with the promise of more storms coming. Inside, 2 people sat with the weight of 20 years of secrets between them, preparing to face a woman who had become a stranger to them both. The gang has a stronghold in Devil's Canyon, Euphemia said. 3 days hard riding through country that doesn't welcome strangers. Then we better start moving. Abel. Her voice stopped him as he began gathering their supplies. When we find her, she might not want to be found. She might see us as threats to everything she's built. Are we? Euphemia's silence stretched long enough to contain all the uncertainty that lay ahead. I don't know, she finally said, but we're about to find out. Devil's Canyon earned its name from the way sound died against its walls. They approached the Crimson Ridge stronghold through terrain that seemed designed to swallow hope. Black stone rose on 3 sides, creating a natural fortress that could be defended by children with slingshots. The 4th side dropped into a gorge so deep that thrown stones never echoed back. Abner counted 7 sentries positioned along the rim, professional placement, fields of fire that covered every approach. Whoever had planned this defense understood both geography and human nature. She designed this, Euphemia said quietly. They had been watching the stronghold for 2 hours from a ridge half a mile away. The settlement below looked prosperous in a way that defied its criminal reputation. Gardens grew in orderly rows. Children played in dusty streets. Smoke rose from chimneys that suggested permanent residence rather than temporary camp. It doesn't look like a gang hideout, Abner observed. It looks like a town. A town with armed guards and strategic positioning, but a town nonetheless, complete with what appeared to be a school, a general store, and a church whose bell tower doubled as a watchtower. Movement near the main building caught Abner's attention. A woman emerged from what appeared to be the largest structure, followed by several men who carried themselves with the deference of subordinates receiving orders. Even at distance, something about her posture made his breath catch. The woman moved with fluid grace across the settlement's central square. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that time and hardship had carved into something both beautiful and dangerous. She wore men's clothing but tailored to fit, practical boots, a gun belt that looked well used. "That's her," Abner whispered. Sarah Calloway had grown into someone he would have passed on any street without recognition. The 8-year-old girl who had followed him everywhere had become a woman who commanded others to follow her. "She's beautiful," Euphemia said, and something in her voice suggested she was seeing her mother for the first time. They watched Sarah direct activities with quiet authority. Men twice her size listened to her words as if they contained salvation. She pointed toward various buildings, traced patterns in the dust with her boot, gestured toward the canyon walls with hands that moved in precise, measured arcs. "She's planning something," Abner said, "or preparing for something she knows is coming." As if summoned by their observation, Sarah stopped in the middle of giving orders and looked directly toward their hiding place. The distance was too great for actual eye contact, but Abner felt the weight of her attention as surely as if she stood beside him. She said something to one of her men. He nodded and jogged toward the settlement's edge. "Time to go," Euphemia said, but it was already too late. Riders emerged from concealed positions along the canyon floor. The trap had been waiting for them, baited with the simple human desire to observe before acting. Sarah had known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. "She knew we'd find her," Abner said with something approaching admiration. "She's known since the moment you bought me at that auction house." The riders approached without haste or aggression, professional escort rather than attacking force. They formed a loose circle around Abner and Euphemia, close enough to discourage flight but far enough away to avoid appearing immediately threatening. The lead rider, a grizzled man with sergeant's bearing, touched his hat brim in polite greeting. "Miss Sarah would like to invite you both for supper," he said formally. "She's been expecting you." They rode into the stronghold under guard that felt more ceremonial than restrictive. The settlement's residents watched their passage with curiosity rather than hostility. Children waved from doorways. Women hanging laundry offered nods of acknowledgement. The main building proved to be a combination of fortress and mansion. Stone walls thick enough to withstand siege, but windows that let in light and air. The interior showed evidence of a woman's touch alongside military practicality. Books lined shelves beside weapons racks. Flowers grew in pots near ammunition stores. Sarah waited for them in a room that might have served as a parlor in any civilized town. She had changed into a dress that managed to be both elegant and practical, dark blue fabric that complemented her coloring without sacrificing freedom of movement. 20 years collapsed into nothing when Abner saw her face clearly. She had their mother's eyes, their father's stubborn chin, but everything else belonged to someone forged by experiences he could not imagine. Scars traced thin lines along her hands and neck. Her posture carried the alertness of someone who had learned that survival required constant vigilance. "Hello, Abel," she said, and her voice held echoes of the girl who used to laugh at his terrible jokes. "Sarah," she turned to Euphemia with an expression that mixed curiosity and something that might have been longing. "And you must be my daughter." The words fell into silence that stretched until it became uncomfortable. Three people bound by blood and separated by choices none of them had wanted to make. "You've built something impressive here," Abner said finally. "I've built something necessary." Sarah moved to a window that overlooked her domain. "These people needed protection, leadership, purpose. I gave them what they needed to survive. By becoming criminals, by becoming stronger than the people who would prey on them." Sarah's reflection in the glass looked tired. "Do you know what I learned during my first 5 years in captivity, Abel? I learned that the world divides into two types of people, those who take what they want and those who have things taken from them." "And which type are you?" Sarah turned from the window to face him directly. "I'm the type who ensures that children like I was never have to make that choice. By running a criminal organization, by controlling territory that would otherwise be controlled by people with no conscience whatsoever." Euphemia had remained silent throughout this exchange, But now she stepped forward. What about the trafficking network, the corruption you helped expose? Sarah's expression grew carefully neutral. What about it? It's still operating, still stealing children, still destroying lives. Some problems are too large for one person to solve, but not too large for one person to profit from. The question hung in the air between mother and daughter with the weight of years of separation and judgment. Sarah's composure finally cracked, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You have no idea what you're talking about, no understanding of what survival requires in places where law exists only as a word on paper. Then explain it to me. I don't owe you explanations. I don't owe either of you anything. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah's voice carried undertones of uncertainty, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as them. Abner stepped between the two women before the confrontation could escalate further. We're not here to judge you, Sarah. We're here because we're family. Family. She tasted the word as if it were foreign. Family abandoned me to 20 years of hell. Family let me burn while they ran to safety. I was 12 years old. I was 8. The math of trauma stretched between them. Two children who had faced impossible circumstances and made the only choices available to them. I've spent 20 years hating myself for leaving you behind, Abner said quietly. And I've spent 20 years learning to rely only on myself. What if you didn't have to anymore? Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. What are you offering, Abel? A chance to finish what was started that night at Willowbrook. A chance to make sure no other children suffer what you suffered. And what would that require? Euphemia reached into her satchel and withdrew the documents they had risked everything to preserve. It would require destroying the network that destroyed our family. The documents spread across Sarah's table told a story written in blood and betrayal. Maps marked trafficking routes that stretched across 3 territories. Financial records documented payments to territorial marshals, judges, and politicians. Names filled ledgers with the bureaucratic precision of evil made routine. Sarah studied each page with the focused intensity of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival. Her fingers traced routes she recognized, paused on names that carried personal meaning. Governor Matthias signed these transport orders, she said quietly. He's been taking money from the network for 15 years, Euphemia replied. Every missing child report that disappeared from official records, every investigation that suddenly lost funding, every witness who decided not to testify. Abner watched his sister's face as she absorbed the scope of corruption they were asking her to confront. The careful mask she wore began to crack, revealing glimpses of the girl who had once believed the world contained more good than evil. This is bigger than my operation, Sarah said finally. It's bigger than all of us, Euphemia agreed. But we're the only ones positioned to do something about it. Sarah set down the documents and moved to her window. The settlement below continued its evening routines, families gathering for supper, children called in from play, the ordinary rhythms of people who trusted her to keep them safe. These people depend on me. If I expose this network, the retaliation will destroy everything I've built. If you don't expose it, how many more children will disappear? The question struck Sarah with visible force. Her reflection in the glass wavered as if the past were superimposing itself over the present. You're asking me to sacrifice my family for the sake of strangers. I'm asking you to save both. Abner stepped forward, understanding finally what Euphemia had been building toward since the moment she spoke his name in that dusty alley. The network can't survive exposure, he said. Once the territorial government falls, the protection disappears. The roots become too dangerous. The whole system collapses and takes everyone connected to it down in the process. Not if we control how it falls. Sarah turned from the window to study him with new attention. What are you proposing? We don't just expose the network, we replace it. Your organization already controls territory and commands loyalty. Instead of running from the law, you become the law. That's not how justice works. It's how survival works. And right now, survival is what matters. Euphemia spread additional documents across the table, These are lists of current victims, children taken in the last 6 months. Most are being held at processing stations before final transport. Sarah's composure finally shattered completely. She pressed her palms against the table and bowed her head as 20 years of carefully controlled emotion broke free. "I swore I would never let this happen to anyone else," she whispered. "Then don't," Abner said simply. The decision formed in the silence that followed, not spoken aloud but visible in the set of Sarah's shoulders and the straightening of her spine. "We'll need territorial marshals we can trust," she said, her voice steady again. "I know 3 who haven't been compromised," Euphemia replied. "Transportation for the victims we rescue. The Underground Railroad has routes through this territory. And protection for my people during the transition. That's where I come in," Abner said. 20 years of wilderness survival teaches a man how to keep people alive when civilization fails them. Sarah looked at both of them with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. "If we do this, there's no going back. The network will try to destroy us all." "They've already been trying," Euphemia pointed out. "Now we fight back." The planning took 3 days. Sarah's organizational skills, developed through years of managing criminal operations, proved invaluable when applied to justice instead of profit. She knew which officials could be trusted, which routes were safest, which timing would cause maximum disruption to the network while minimizing harm to innocents. Euphemia provided the evidence and contacts with legitimate law enforcement. Her years as a bounty hunter had built relationships with honest lawmen who would act on credible information about corruption. Abner contributed knowledge of hidden territories where rescued victims could be sheltered, while the legal system processed their cases. His mountain hideouts, connected through Native American allies, formed a chain of safe houses stretching to free territories. On the 4th morning, they rode out together. The first processing station fell without violence. Sarah's reputation preceded her, and the guards abandoned their posts rather than face the ghost walker's displeasure. 17 children were freed and spirited away to safety through underground routes. The second station proved more heavily defended, but Sarah's tactical experience and Euphemia's combat skills overwhelmed resistance that relied more on intimidation than actual fighting ability. 23 more victims rescued. By the end of the first week, the territorial government was in chaos. Governor Matthias fled rather than face trial. 3 judges resigned. The trafficking network's infrastructure collapsed as corrupt officials scrambled to save themselves. Sarah's organization emerged from the shadows as legitimate peacekeepers. The territorial legislature, desperate for stability, granted her provisional authority to maintain law and order until proper elections could be held. But the real transformation happened around a campfire on their 7th night, when Sarah reached into her saddlebag and withdrew something she had carried for 20 years. Their mother's locket, the one Euphemia had shown Abner in the desert. "I want you to have this," Sarah said, offering it to her daughter. Euphemia's hands trembled as she accepted the weight of family history. "I'm sorry," Sarah continued quietly. "I'm sorry I gave you away. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to be your mother when you needed one." "You were surviving," Euphemia replied. "Sometimes that's all we can do, and sometimes we get the chance to do more." Abner watched his sister and niece embrace for the first time and felt the guilt he had carried for 20 years finally begin to dissolve. Not because he had been forgiven, but because forgiveness was no longer necessary. They had all done what they needed to survive, and now they were doing what they needed to heal. 3 months later, Sarah won election as territorial marshal by the largest margin in recorded history. Her first official act was to establish a victim assistance program funded by seized criminal assets. Euphemia resumed her career as a bounty hunter, but now with official backing and a mission that extended far beyond simple law enforcement. She became the territory's chief investigator of crimes against children. Abner built a school in the mountains where rescued victims could learn skills for their new lives. His wilderness expertise, combined with teachers Sarah recruited, created something unique in the territories, a place where broken children could grow into strong adults. The trafficking network never recovered from their coordinated assault. Other territories adopted their methods, and within 2 years, the systematic theft of children became too dangerous and unprofitable to continue. On quiet evenings, the three of them would sit on Sarah's porch and watch the sun set over land that had been transformed from criminal stronghold into something approaching civilization. Not perfect justice, but real progress toward a world where children could sleep safely. The past could not be changed, but the future could be protected. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.